this is one of the best opportunities I find in all of Mexico.
I am so excited to have this fresh new episode of Vallarta Real to share with you, our loyal viewers. Today is a total treat. We have economist, financial commentator, and trusted Mexican investment consultant, Vin Maru, with us today. Vin has a huge announcement for us at the end of this podcast, so stay until the end and let's dive in. A good place to start would be to sort of ask about your personal story. Like, how long had you been thinking about making the move to Mexico? Were you thinking about global relocation in other areas? And then what was it in the end that drew you to Puerto Vallarta about 3 years ago?
So I had a media background from the 90s and the tech days. And then the tech wreck came and budget started going away from corporate clients. So I got into finance. And my journey into Mexico really came when the 08-09 crash came, and I'd watched my gold portfolio of stocks, skyrocket up leading into it and just crash right down. But that being said, I ended up coming to Acapulco a couple of winters in a row, but hadn't been back since. And so the opportunity came. I applied for my immigration, qualified, came down. When I knew I was going to move here, I started that Investors and Entrepreneurs Mexico Facebook group, just because I knew I wanted to talk about the Mexican market, but stocks and the markets that I followed in general. But I thought there was going to be, when I looked into the Mexican landscape in terms of investing in opportunities, obviously there's some coverage on it, but I don't think it was done very effectively in terms of someone really just kind of looking in and researching and focusing on it. That's right. So I started the group, casually started posting stuff. And then over the last few years, got a little more active. And then, more momentum. So that's where I'm at right now, where I'm working on the group, doing a few other things. And I started a new website called Financial Liberties. And that was kind of the idea of, offering services, putting my content. So it's not just Mexico focused, but there is going to be a lot of content that's Mexico related.
Right. And we have a huge teaser for our followers and viewers at the very end for you to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial venture. So we'll save that and chat with people about that new idea. So what advice do you have for other investors, maybe just starting their journey, thinking about making the move to Mexico and maybe looking at real estate in this market?
I've identified 3 major investment vehicles that people that move to Mexico or become expats, they either look at real estate, it's always the first one, or one of the big options.
That's right.
The second is getting into bonds, the Mexican Sietes, or in stocks and stuff like that. You can get brokerage accounts, and having funds with a financial advisor here, or starting a business. So on the real estate side, it seems like that's the most common thing people will do, is whether they're buying it for themselves or buying it as an investment vehicle. You look at other asset classes and they've already doubled.
Crateinteriors has 14 years of history and case study data in this market. So I can actually cite cases of clients we worked with more than 14 years ago who put their properties on market for resale and more than double. Exchange rates. How do exchange rates and currency fluctuations work for and against those making cross-border investments?
So the currency rate, or the dollar of a currency, or the value of a currency, is generally based on the economic viability of that country, more or less.
Yes.
So if people are bullish on the US, for example, the dollar will strengthen. Now, the dollar also strengthens in terms of a risk-off trade. So if markets are contentious and they're coming down, well, people pile into the dollar and they go into treasuries. So there'll be demand for that. In terms of Mexico itself, the Mexican economy was doing quite well, especially after COVID. So we saw the peso strengthen from from, I think it was about 21, 22. I didn't even think it was a little higher for the US dollar just at the peak of it.
Yeah.
Let's call it 21, 22,
Yeah.
down to about 16 and a half.
Yes.
So the peso really strengthened right after COVID.
Yes.
And then the Mexican elections were coming in last summer. There's a lot of fear in having it here, having funds here. So generally, you know, I think for the value of the peso itself, it really comes down to is how strong the Mexican economy is forecasted to be, but also how much demand there is for pesos coming in. So foreign direct investment was one source of demand, but repatriation of funds from the US was another. So that drove demand for pesos. Now that's slowed down quite a bit also. So, and then now with the new U.S. administration and their crackdown on certain, you know, certain Mexico in general, you're starting to see the U.S. strengthen over the last week or two, or a couple of weeks now. It's started to strengthen against the peso. Activators always said there's just an interest rate differential between the U.S. Fed funds rate and the Mexican central bank's rate. So whatever the U.S. Fed funds and the lending rate down there would be, is you can look towards about a 4% spread. So we've actually seen that the interest rates in Mexico come down quite a bit from over 2 years ago. 2 years ago, you could have invested in a Mexican government bond and earned 10, 11%. And that's probably considered one of the risk-free investment vehicles here in Mexico. Now that is probably a 8-ish, and they just dropped it. They've been dropping the interest rates here in Mexico for several quarters now, and they just did another quarter point drop. So I think we're close to the bottom on that. So probably, you know, I would say the bottom of the weakening of the peso. But my suspicion is, in general, I think we're in this happy medium of the exchange rate. So let's call it 1850 to 1950 is where we're at now. Will we peak above it and below it at times? Sure, but there's a trading range. And in that, there's actually strategies people can do to maximize transfer funds when the timing is right for them.
That's right.
So I use Wise for transferring funds. It's probably one of the lowest rates that you're going to get in terms of the extra charges
amongst our followers. Yeah.
Yeah, but the good thing with Wise is you can set a limit price on what you want the exchange rate to hit before it actually goes through the transfer. So for example, if you have X amount of US dollars sitting in Wise, if the exchange rate is, let's say, 18.90 right now,
sure,
but you have time, well, you can set a price to say, well, if the US and Mexico exchange rate hits 1950, for example, automatically set it to convert. The other option is one of the investment banks here that I always recommend for clients to look at. They have a termed note. It's a structured note. So if the same scenario where if you need to transfer or convert US dollars to pesos, but you have some time, they will allow you to set the price. There's a term limit on how long it'll be open for, but you can keep rolling it over and over.
Yep.
But here's the beauty of it. They actually pay you an amazing interest rate during that time.
Oh, best scenario.
Not only do you get a favorable rate if it hits you, but you also will make a great interest rate on the funds that, because they do block your funds. So for example, you need to convert $10,000 and you're holding 10. Now I think 10,000 is on the low end to get into this note, but I'm just using this as the example. Then they will pay you an interest rate, and it's actually quite higher than the government bond rate, the CIBanco note rate here. So it's an option.
So those are just a few of the many advantages that Mexican banks potentially offer our viewers and those in our circle who are considering making the move to paradise. What other ways do you think Mexican banks here can offer advantages to, you know, to our peers looking to make this move?
Well, again, it's a diversification strategy. The yields down here, even on the Mexican or corporate bonds, are higher than what we would get in Canada or the US. I'm from Canada, so there's that advantage. Now, the other thing is you can also transfer funds, and if you choose the investment bank that I've chosen, they will allow you to buy securities, whether they're Mexican-based mutual funds, and their yields are generally higher than the CITES rate.
Mhm.
Or they'll actually let you buy US securities. For example, if you're still bullish on some of these big name tech companies or other sectors, you can actually buy it through the brokerage account. Now, the one advantage you will get is if you're a resident and you've set up your Mexican investment account, and whether you choose their mutual fund or you decide to self-direct invest and choose individual securities, the capital gains rate here in Mexico on securities is 10%.
Yeah.
So you have to look and compare that to what you would pay in terms of capital gains rate back in Canada or the US.
You're right.
But a 10% capital gains rate is actually not too bad, considering someone who's a real estate investor, for example. If you're a resident and you're registered with SAT, they give you an exemption every 3 years. I'm sure you've talked about this, where you don't have to pay capital gains, or it's very minimal. But if you're a non-resident and you do sell, there's a pretty high capital gains rate on real estate. So now you got to ask yourself, well, do I buy real estate, maybe get that 7, 8, 10, 15% appreciation a year? Or can I be very selective on stocks, maybe get the 50, 100%, winner, and then pay a 10% tax rate? So those are things, but that's, you have to got to take your own risk profile into account.
Balancing that, yeah. So how do you balance that potential upside on the higher interest rates with that capital gains or that 10% payment?
In anything, I think a diversified approach is always the best. But there are some sectors that I'm really bullish on right now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you're wanting to have a higher return with maybe a higher risk profile, but the returns are, I think, going to be phenomenal over the next 5 years on certain sectors. So, again, never put your eggs in one basket, as always the saying, and have that diversified approach. Yeah. But I'm bullish on crypto and fintech in general, neobanking and stuff. So have a percentage there, precious metals. And I think we're entering a whole new era in terms of, we went through this 100-year industrial age and revolution.
That's right.
Then we've been in this tech revolution 20, 30 years now.
Yes.
The next bit, and I tend to find investment themes and I stick with them for 5 to 7 years. So I did the precious metals from 2005 to 2012, 2013. Then I went into cannabis from 2014 to 2021. Now I've been here in Mexico and crypto has been taken off, and there's a lot of, with AI and stuff that's happening. So we do some coverage on that. You really want to identify the leaders in those verticals and get invested early on. So I'm really still bullish on AI, even though these stocks have gone up quite a bit. The robotics industry, anything like autonomous vehicles, the software, tech is still not going to slow down regardless of whatever happens. So those are the things that I look at. But that being said, I'm actually back into precious metals. And I think we're going to see a rotation out of tech a little bit, because they really have gone up quite a bit over the last few years. And going into more defensive plays, and precious metals is a big defensive play that I suggest as well.
Are you looking at any of those options on the Mexican Stock Exchange?
Well, what interests me in the Mexican market, and this is me when I was back in Canada doing precious metals in the resource sector and then the cannabis, was companies that were private going public. So they would do offerings before going public, and they did very well during those times. So private equity is one thing that I'm seriously looking at right now in Mexico, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to invest in companies that are well established and have growth, but they don't have access to the lending and credit facilities like you would see back in the US. And I've talked to fund managers out of the US, and I keep telling them Mexico is a perfect market right now to tap into these companies that are, they do very well. Maybe let's say US dollars are doing 20, 30, $50 million in revenues, but they still are not at the point where they get the big money from the lending institutions here, or they're not ready to go onto the Mexican Stock Exchange. So there seems to be that sweet spot for private equity to come in and really capitalize on the growth of some of these companies that are in that phase where they just need that extra $20-30 million to get them to that stage where they can double or triple those sales. Then they can go to the Mexican banks to refinance, or they go listed on the exchange. So that's something that's kind of keen. I've been involved in private equity and private finance deals in the past, and it's something I'm very keen on in Mexico.
That sounds very interesting. And I think a small subset of that has been the private financing for real estate transactions too, because private mortgages don't exist the way that they do in other parts of North America within Mexico.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of products cobbled together to give people a potential lending opportunity for a mortgage.
And here's the beauty of that is I've had real estate developers ask me if I could help them find sources of capital.
Yes.
And they were willing to pay anywhere from 16 to 20%.
Right.
So that's kind of the going rate of what real estate developers will pay. And you can secure your funds against the land that they own or whatnot. So just get them through that hump of the initial capital they need for the construction, to start the construction and before pre-sales.
Right. I've noticed on your Facebook group page, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of, I think, anxious tracking about the news around Mexican banks like Intercam, which we have seen, wading through this auditing protocol and, rumors of potential shutdowns. You have a very good inside track on that. So how would you explain the situation to somebody that's maybe looking at it from thousands of miles away on your Facebook page, not sure what's real or, what's propaganda?
Well, the U.S. Treasury came in and deemed these three banks as money laundering. And so essentially, the banks still operate. So Intercam and CIBanco are the two. And then there's another one, which was more of a brokerage firm.
Okay.
They still operate. You can send funds in and around within Mexico, but you can't use your debit card abroad. It's still difficult to send funds into those bank accounts. I think the last I heard from another person that was having issues, they've been told maybe 2 more weeks before the issue might get resolved. There was a 90-day extension put on it by the U.S. So by early September, I think what they're doing is going through an audit process on individual accounts to see, if there was suspicious funds coming in and out. And if you were just using it for regular banking, my suspicion is they'll have things smoothed out by next month sometime, and hopefully it gets resolved. That being said, Actinver, the other investment bank that's the only one I have promoted. I've never actually promoted Intercam. They've grown a lot of their business over the last month and a half since all this started. I mean, they're a pure investment bank more than your traditional bank down here in Mexico, which is why they can even allow non-residents to open an account. So that's something your audience may want to consider if they're not here as a resident in Mexico, but they frequent here. They can go to Actinver, and Intercam did allow accounts as well, but open an account and use it with them. But they do have a minimum deposit now. It's actually increased quite a bit in the last month and a half or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do have a minimum deposit that has to be in the account and invested with them.
Have you looked at the pros and cons of owning a business in Mexico and what it takes to operate one here?
I'm diving into it more and more now. So, I'm doing more interviews with established businesses, speaking with them. I've looked at it for myself down here. I started learning how to cook Indian food down here, and I did pop-ups once a week, and it went very well. Everyone loved the food.
Oh my God.
But for me, I don't really want to run a restaurant down here. It's a very seasonal business. Yeah. So you've got to make enough during the high season to cover and ride you through the low season. The hospitality industry is just not up my alley. So for me, it's not there. For someone else who's been in that space and wants to open up a bar or a restaurant, sure, by all means. There's niches that can be found here that do very well. But I think it's also, you got to choose a location in anything, like in a restaurant business. I think the location and the marketing and having that niche is something that's vital to the survival of the business.
And what about the back end in terms of registering a business, paying taxes, hiring and human capital, managing all of those in a foreign country can be quite different and quite daunting, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a learning curve I'm going through right now, just talking to other owners. So I really can't say I'm an expert in this, but obviously I think the idea would be is have a lawyer help you get registered correctly with
Yes.
your business ideas. One thing I've heard and learned about is make sure when you identify what business you're going to do, put everything down that even remotely relates to that business. And I'll give you the example. There's a gentleman who started and had a business down here doing solar panels, installation, and all of
Okay.
that.
Amazing.
Software, hardware, you name it, installation. He had it all covered in the notary.
Yeah.
The one thing he did not put in there was hosting webinars or having in-person group meetings discussing it and quote unquote providing educational material in the solar panel industry. And he got cracked down on very hard because I think other installers and solar panel companies complained and they really fined him heavily. So the
Oh,
one thing is yeah, make sure if you're going to get into a business, cover all your bases on everything you could think that is associated with that business, have it listed in there as part of your business profile. And
wow.
then obviously have a good an accountant to do your filings
Yeah. Yeah.
for you, and register with SAT. Now, that being said, I'll give you one caveat that I really like about Mexico is the beauty of this is one of the best opportunities I found in all of Mexico. So outside of actually registering a corporation, if you're thinking of a big business, if you're self-employed down here, there's a way you can apply for self-employment. So you're a contractor, you're not directly employed by a Mexican company.
Yes.
You can apply for RESICO status. And with that, they allow you to earn up to almost $200,000 US at a ridiculously low tax rate.
Wow.
And when I say low, it's 1% to 2.5% income tax. You do monthly submissions on your books and
Yeah.
like your sales that you've done. But literally, it's such a ridiculously low rate. I couldn't believe it when I heard about it. And if you qualify, I think everyone who is going to be doing that down, that's a great option, is what I'm saying.
That
But
opportunity.
it's
Yeah.
it's more under if you're doing consulting or self-employed type of a business, then that makes absolute sense
Sure.
versus
Yeah.
any other business.
So for anyone looking for an alternative global passport and, some sort of economic upside, that would put Mexico at the top of the list.
Yeah, and they attracted a lot of digital nomads down
Yeah,
here. I mean, there's
of
a lot
course.
of
I would
attention
imagine.
around that
Yeah.
right now. Now, I would almost say if you are that digital nomad and you're making money in the US, and as long as it's under that $200,000 threshold, it would make more sense to become a resident here,
They're here.
get your registered here in Mexico, get registered with the tax authorities, the SAT office, get your RFC, and then apply for the RESICO, I think I pronounced, as a self-employed, and pay minimal tax down here.
Yeah. We'll put some of those links in the text below for sure. And for anyone who's super curious about all the resources that we're mentioning, you can message guides in the comments, and we'll send you like a little hot sheet from Vin and myself of professional resources and contacts that might help you put this all together. So we'll
Sure.
get that link set up as well. So, there's been so much conversation coming out of both, I think, the US and Canada about market corrections in these last months. And I think, it does make investors, somewhat anxious and kind of figuring out what to do with resources. How can making the move to Mexico give some people a bit more breathing room? Like, what are the advantages of maybe being based here while the market is doing somewhat of a correction?
The Mexican stock market is a lot more stable, but it's super undervalued compared to the US and American stock exchanges, extremely undervalued. There's an opportunity to buy undervalued Mexican stocks, obviously. The big thing, I think, the advantage of moving to Mexico and diversifying out of the US is I think there's still something's going to happen, a trigger point with the US debt the way it is, or a reset. We're in the middle of a reset, but it's kind of a undisclosed financial reset. So we're migrating away from the old traditional banking system into a new fintech world. What they are talking about in the US, there's the Genius Act that just got passed. And in that, they are allowing stable coins to be issued. So even the stock market is going to change over the next few years to a decade. So instead of owning stocks through your brokerage firm, you're going to own digital stocks, tokens of that. So you're going to start to see these financial middlemen layers get reduced over the next 5 to 10 years.
Right. Since our COVID era, we've had so much more access to podcasts and thought leaders and people with inside information and experts in so many different industries accessible to all of us. I think overall our understanding of bigger systems is much better than it was years ago. We've got access to understand globally in ways that I don't think the general public did in the past.
And I think that's the beauty of what the internet has allowed is access to information.
Yes. Yeah.
And now with AI, and ChatGPT and all of these AI tools, we're going to enter an environment where you can see individuals using these tools, AI tools and that, run a business, start a business and run it and be a one-man operation. But these companies, these businesses could be millions of dollars, if not more. I mean, they're talking about, $1 billion individual company being generated because AI is doing all of the legwork that would have taken, an army of people and a lot of costs in terms of salary to do. So in this disruption, I think part of the disruption of the stock market I think a lot of people will get displaced over the next 5-10 years as we get more and more adoption of AI technologies and robotics. I think what happens over the next 5-10 years with this AI robotic Jetsons world, eventually Star Trek world. If you recall in Star Trek, no one really seemed to make an income. They were provided everything they need. They were doing what they did. I think that's kind of that's where we head into the future.
Yeah. It's become a very compelling and visible social concept. It's come off the pages of cinema and it's become very tenable and very real recently. I feel like we can all, we can absolutely envision it from where we are today with all the tools that we've got, through ChatGPT and all the other AI apps.
And had you envisioned that 20, 30 years ago, when you're watching these?
Sure, sci-fi back then. Today, I totally can picture it. Exactly. Yeah. I would probably make some tweaks and adjustments on the furnishings that we see in those movies. I think we can do better. They didn't exactly envision the world that I'm imagining today. So, quick fire for you. What's one thing that every vacation home buyer or rental property investors could maybe do this year to accelerate their financial goals?
Look for value in regions that are not overheated in terms of the real estate price. There's I think there's some pockets that are way overvalued and way overpriced, and they're feeling the ramifications for it. Now, that being said, there's always opportunities, even in these hot markets, because there's always going to be demand in Vallarta. I mean, it's a beautiful bay, very safe in terms of regions of Mexico.
Right.
So if we get that 5-10% correction, 15%, embrace it because it's an opportunity. I don't think the demand ever goes away. Where I think there's personal value in real estate in this region or in Mexico in general, I like buying the one-level home in a nice neighborhood and then creating value by adding 2 or 3 more levels to it and making 3 or 4 more rental properties.
That's right. Yes.
And the reason why I like it is if you're an American and you had access to credit back home to fund development down here for your own home,
sure,
or you get a Moxie mortgage, for example. Moxie mortgage is now maybe charging 9% or so, which is high but reasonable, doable. You buy that one-level home, even though it might be expensive. And then let's say it costs you an extra $20,000, $30,000 to build each floor or each apartment.
That's right.
at some point you can sever those apartments off individually and sell them off as individual units. Each unit could sell for 150 minimum, I would think, if not more, if it's a nice unit.
Yes.
So that's where I say you can create value here in real estate.
So the moment we've all been waiting for, why don't you reveal to all of us this entrepreneurial idea that you've been playing around with? We're going to watch you bring it to life. So explain to your followers and ours what you're thinking of doing right now.
Lots of moving parts are going to be happening, but that I have this investors and entrepreneurs group that I started, and we've got about 4,200 members. That is coincide with me starting a whole podcast series interviewing and speaking with established business owners in Mexico.
Right.
So how they got started, what challenges they face, what opportunities they see. If we're going to talk about niche markets, I think there's a need for someone to focus on commercial real estate or established businesses. Yeah. So the business launch idea of what I'm starting now is a business brokeraging service.
Okay.
So if you're an established business, have financials to prove your income, hopefully in a growth market, and you're looking for an exit strategy, that's what I'm going to try to help out with, because I have access to people that either through the groups and connections I've already made that are maybe looking to buy an established business here in Mexico, or fund managers from Canada and the US that are looking to enter specific niches here. Yeah. So there's an opportunity. So that's kind of what I'm working on, is
exciting,
gearing towards launching this kind of business brokeraging service.
Well, for anyone who's thinking about starting a business or maybe getting into one and maybe acquiring a business, I think, Vin, you're an incredible resource along with so many other things. I think people definitely, whether you consider yourself a financial advisor or not, I think people really appreciate and follow your wisdom. We'll look forward to what you present on your new podcast and chatting again. For anyone who wants any of the resources that we've chatted about and the contacts or company names that we've mentioned today, just comment guides in the comments and we'll send you a list of resources of both of ours to share. Good luck with your entrepreneurial endeavor, Vin, and thank you for chatting with us today. And we'll look forward to episode 2.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it and I enjoyed it.
Oh my God, it was so fun to finally meet you and to deep dive into some of these topics. Have an awesome afternoon. Thanks, Vin. Be in touch.
Take care.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. This is just one of the ways we are telling the stories of art, architecture, and great design and keeping Vallarta real.